This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to the November series of 1 month to a more effective compliance program series that I'm running in 2017. This month, we're going to take a look at 1 month of 360 degrees of communication in compliance. This month's sponsor is Dun & Bradstreet. The only thing that is constant right now in the regulatory environment is change. Supply chain leaders and compliance professionals alike continue to struggle with how to best adequately identify, screen, and gain visibility into ownership structures of third parties and or customers so that they understand exactly who they are doing business with. Companies can knowingly finance goods that are potentially obtained illegally or sold on the black market. Procurement teams that are unaware of third-party activities and have antiquated systems, they put their company at risk. Without proper visibility, these teams could unknowingly be funding terrorism or even engaging in human trafficking. In-depth research is needed to identify ultimate beneficial owners and third-party risks. No business ties to corrupt practices such as human trafficking or money laundering is going to self-report, so companies must take this work on themselves and obtain third-party data needed to determine risk, mitigate exposure, and protect their brand and comply with regulations. Dun & Bradstreet offers an end-to-end comprehensive solution to help organizations tackle this exact complexity. Leverage Dun & Bradstreet's complete due diligence reporting to know your vendor and your third-party partners. Do not expose yourself to undue risk. Contact Dun & Bradstreet today to learn more about vendor onboarding, supply risk management, and comprehensive compliance check. This month I'm going to tackle the concept of 360 degrees of communication and compliance. We're going to take a look at it from a variety of ways and mechanisms. We're going to consider the Chief Compliance Officer and his or her role in communications. We're going to take a look at how you can facilitate a two-way conversation of communications while sitting in the CCO suite. We're going to consider some of the leadership and other components of a CCO's role and how they will help you have a more robust and indeed holistic approach to compliance. We're going to consider the bottom-up approach to communications by utilizing communications techniques for your employees, third parties, contractors, and those that may come into contractual relationship with your company through the supply chain. We're going to consider 360 degrees of communications through operationalization of compliance and culture. It's going to be a very interesting month. I think as a CCO you will learn quite a bit, and at the end of the month you will not only have information which will allow you to be a more well-rounded CCO, but bring a much more holistic approach to your compliance function. My year-long series of 1 month to a more effective compliance program and the November edition of 1 month of 360 degrees of communication and compliance are a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Day 12, communicating across cultural boundaries. One of the most critical issues to a corporate compliance function is breaking through a company's internal cultural boundaries. Often, managers discover that perfectly rational deals fall apart when their business counterparts make what seem to be unreasonable demands or don't respect their commitments. However, as a cultural bridge, you can find that this will help you to understand what your international audience is communicating to you, both in verbal and nonverbal formats. During a wide variety of activities familiar to any compliance professional, such as training, investigations, or simply meetings, where the compliance perspective must be articulated in a business setting. Erin Meyer, in an article, listed out 5 different steps for communicating a compliance program across multinational boundaries. Number 1, Adapt the way you express disagreement. Simply because you disagree with someone, it is not a sign that the discussion is going poorly, but that is an invitation to engage in lively talk. The key is to listen for verbal clues, specifically what linguists call upgraders or downgraders. Upgraders are words to strengthen your disagreement, such as totally, completely, and absolutely. Downgraders are words such as partially, a little bit, and maybe, which soften the disagreement. Many countries use a lot of upgrades with their disagreement. Try to understand the upgraders and downgraders within the cultural context of those with whom you are dealing. 2, know when to bottle it up and when to let it pour out. Some cultures have very demonstrative ways of speaking and gesturing. However, other cultures are not comfortable with such displays. You need to understand the key difference. So the second rule of international negotiations is to recognize what an emotional outpouring, whether yours or theirs, signifies in the culture with which you are negotiating, and adapt your reaction accordingly. Was it a bad sign that Swedish negotiators sat calmly across the table and never entered to an open debate and showed little passion? Not at all. But if you encountered the same behavior while negotiating in Israel, it might be a sign that the deal was about to die an early death. Number 3, learn how the other culture builds trust. Most Americans think that building trust in a business setting is gained by demonstrating your usefulness and competency in providing solid information. However, this type of approach is not always the most effective across the globe. There are 2 different approaches to building trust, cognitive and affective. In the cognitive approach, you gain trust when you feel confidence in someone's accomplishments, skills, and reliability. In short, you show you know your stuff, and for the compliance practitioner, there is usually not much of a higher compliment. This type of trust is more valued by Americans, Germans, Australians, and Brits. This is the trust that comes from the head. But there is a trust that comes from the heart, and that's the affective trust. But it's more than simply emotive. It derives from emotional closeness, empathy, or friendship. It means that you see one another on a personal level. This is particularly true in BRIC countries, Southeast Asia, and the like. Some techniques you can employ to build trust are to invest times in meals and drinks, or tea, karaoke, golf, whatever it may be, and don't talk during these activities. Let your guard down and show your human side, including your weakness. Demonstrate general interest in the other party and make a friend. Be patient. In China, this type of bond may take a long time to build. You'll eventually have a friend, but you will have a deal. Number 4, avoid the yes or no questions. This is something Americans have an innate amount of trouble getting our collective heads around. Most generally, when we ask a direct question requiring a direct yes or no answer, we expect, whatever the answer is, it will be adhered to going forward. In many other cultures, that may not always be correct. In some cultures, it is rude to tell someone you respect and have trust for no directly. While this may say yes, what they really mean is no. Conversely, even when the verbal response is simply strong or even a multiple no, it may simply mean the party needs more time to respond. This means you should try to adapt to avoid a simple yes or no response by asking more open-ended questions that elicit information which will help provide you with context for the next answer or indeed the next question. You should also watch body language and other signals more closely. If something is affirmative, you may feel like a no, an extra beat of silence, a strong sucking of breath, or even a muttering. So be watchful and listen closely. Number 5, be careful about putting it in writing. This last point may be the most difficult for the CCO and compliance practitioner, especially if you accept my mantra of document, document, document. In many cultures, even the follow-up to a conversation with something in writing may well seem like a slap in the face, the lack of trust, or communicating that the listener did not comprehend what you were communicating. You may need to do an additional amount of explanation around your written compliance documentation. Do not be dogmatic about it, but emphasize the need for written materials in the appropriate situations. Communications and compliance must be largely drawn around trust. For any compliance practitioner, the key is to working with your employee base across the globe. Implicit in building trust is that you get out of the home office and travel to other locations. While you can build cognitive trust in demonstrating your usefulness to an overseas business unit from your home in America, you can never build affective trust sitting in the corporate office. Get out about and meet your employees and build a trust that will allow a successful 360 degree of communication. So what are today's 3 key takeaways? Number 1, communications and compliance must be largely drawn around trust. And of course, this means getting out of the office, get out of that ivory tower. Number 2, look for as many cultural bridges as you can find, as it will help you to understand what the international audience is communicating with you. If you are a compliance officer and you have FCPA responsibilities, that by definition means you have an international organization. You need to understand what your employees outside the United States are communicating to you with all of the signals that we've talked about in this podcast. And number 3, one of the most critical things that a compliance function must do is break through a company's internal cultural barriers. This is Tom Fox. I hope you've enjoyed day 12, and I hope you'll join me tomorrow for day 13 of 1 month to 360 degrees of communication in compliance. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of 1 month to 360 days of communication and compliance. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate our podcast, as it would help in our rankings and also help get the word out about the only daily compliance podcast involving the nuts and bolts of compliance. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Finally, I'd like to thank our sponsor for this month, Dun & Bradstreet. I hope you will join me tomorrow for another episode. The podcast series in November, 1 month to 360 degrees of communication, is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.